Hello and welcome to today's webinar examining what landlords are doing to ease the pressure of rising energy prices on residents. Today's event, sponsored by ACO, is part of our ongoing Give Fuel Poverty a Voice campaign, which is looking to drive fuel poverty up the agenda in the sector and more widely. Before I introduce our speakers today, a bit of background to set the scene for the discussion. At the end of last year, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation asked just over 4,000 people in the bottom 40% of incomes how they were coping with the rising cost of living. It estimates that around 710,000 households are going without adequate clothing, food and heat because they can't afford them, and that 2.4 million low-income households have borrowed money or used credit to pay for their bills in the previous year. And then, of course, in recent weeks, there's been the controversy after desk agents for British Gas force-fitted prepayment meters, and we've got an ongoing discussion around that, which will factor into today's debate. In January, the regulator, Ofgem, announced a package of work focused on prepayment meters and is now asking for views on further measures that could reduce the need for them to be installed, and we'll be discussing some of the pros and cons of that later as well. Prior to this story breaking certainly in the public consciousness, Citizens Advice said it had seen more people unable to top up their prepayment meter in the first 9 months of 2022 than in the previous 3 years combined, often prompting people in debt to self-disconnect. Against this backdrop, today we want to explore what landlords could and should be doing to ease the pressure on residents to pay energy bills. Among other things, we'll be talking about things like the channels for residents to access fuel vouchers and efficient white goods, reducing the tariff for prepayment meters, and the benefits of smart metering to allow residents to better monitor their usage and pay by direct debit if they wish, and a whole raft of things beyond. To talk us through things, we'll be hearing from Peter Smith, Director of Policy and Advocacy at National Energy Action, Stephen Burns, Executive Director, Care, Inclusion and Communities at Peabody, Sam Collier, Sustainability and Ethics Lead with HomeLink, and Linda Tukey, Money Advice and Benefits Manager at Vivid Homes. Welcome all, and we'll be hearing from them in just a few seconds. But before we start, a little bit of a chance to find out where you are, where our audience is today, and hopefully to help guide the discussions at least a little bit, but just to warm things up. So poll appearing on your screens right now. Does your organisation currently track or measure how many of your tenants are living in fuel poverty? And a few options there. Yes, no, but we plan to in the next 6 months. No, and I don't know. So if everybody could click and pick an answer now, just to give us a bit of a feel for where you all are today as well. So yeah, again, does your organisation currently track how many of your tenants are living in fuel poverty? Fabulous, right? I think that's given everybody a few seconds to warm up and to click. So let's have a look at the results. So yeah, interesting, a real mix in here. So about 1 in 5 saying yes, and then we've got 18% saying no, but we plan to in the next 6 months, and 36% saying no. So a real mix there, and 25% in the don't know category. Yeah, a real mix of performance, and yeah, we'll pick up on that very shortly as we move through into the discussions. Right, one final reminder before we move to the presentations, and that is that this is your chance to ask the questions that are most relevant to you and your own organisation. So please do use the question and answer box on the screen to ask the questions that are going to be most useful to you. And following the presentations, we'll get through as many of those as we possibly can. But please ask the questions as we're going along, and we'll pick up on as many as possible once those presentations are finished. Right, that is more than enough from me. Welcome, everybody. And Peter, welcome, and it is over to you.
First of all, I want to say a massive thank you to Inside Housing for not only hosting this webinar, but also your ongoing campaign to give those households in fuel poverty a louder voice. That couldn't be more important at the moment. We'll all be aware of the impact of this energy crisis, and particularly the brutal winter that we're still in, but just coming out of, thankfully. Overall, as a charity, National Energy Action estimate that over the course of last year, fuel poverty has gone from about 4.5 million UK households up to 6.7 million UK households currently living in fuel poverty, unable to adequately keep warm, irrespective of the welcome and quite substantial government support that has been put in place to try and combat the worst of this energy crisis. Sadly, we think things are going to get worse before they get better, and many of you will already be aware of this looming cliff edge in April, when a lot of the government support that's currently in place, in particular the Energy Bill Support Scheme, which is currently providing a £400 rebate off people's energy bills, disappears, and the government a planned increase, despite wholesale prices falling, a planned increase to the energy price guarantee, moving up from £2,500 for an average household up to £3,000. We already know that £2,500 on average is totally unmanageable, particularly for those households with medical dependencies or live in larger households, or who live in the least efficient homes. And that £2,500 average for somebody in the least efficient homes already feels like a couple of £1,000s more. But in April, as and when those changes come through, and we're hoping and planning and doing a lot of work at the moment to try and ensure that this doesn't happen, but if those changes do come through, unfortunately, we'll see a further 1.5 million households that are going to be plunged into fuel poverty across the UK, again, unable to adequately heat and power their homes. It's worth saying right from the outset that social landlords in particular have been at the forefront of this crisis, and we welcome a huge amount of the upturn in work and proactive work that has been going on to try and combat these issues with your tenants. We know that there's been a huge attempt to try and upskill and train up, particularly tenant liaison officers, on these issues, and try and identify those households that are most at risk of living in a cold home. And that's absolutely vital work, and we hope that that will continue, even if the wider crisis abates for many households. We also know that a huge amount of work is being done to try and raise awareness of the government support that is available. I just want to highlight one really practical action which we hope that all of you can be involved in the short term, which is to raise awareness for traditional prepayment meter customers of the Energy Bill Support Scheme. I mentioned it earlier in terms of providing a very significant rebate off people's bills. For the vast majority of households that are up credit customers, that's worked effectively and behind the scenes. But for those households on those traditional prepayment meters, they've had to redeem that support manually, often having to travel long distances to afford to get those top-ups. Often in social housing, there's poor relationship between tenants and their energy supplier, and often energy suppliers do not know who the customer is, and there's very little interface. So it's absolutely crucial in this period that tenants are prompted to get in contact proactively with their energy supplier, make them aware of their accurate contact details, and make sure that if they have missed out on some of those vouchers being issued, or they've yet to redeem that support, that they're aware that it's a vital opportunity that they shouldn't miss out on. And I hope that we can, through this event, raise awareness of the desperate need to redeem that support before those vouchers run out. In addition to that, households, very similar sort of households, have also missed out on support through the previous Warm Home Discount Scheme. Previously, energy supply tenants would have applied to their energy provider for support through that programme, and then been told that they would access support via the broader group. We know that social housing in particular has been badly affected by the reforms that the government have made this year to that programme. In particular, smaller households in smaller properties with lower energy bills are likely to be falling through the cracks. So there's a vital need in the short term to find out those households that haven't been able to access this support and try and signpost other forms of support to try and make sure that they get equivalent support through this difficult period. Martin rightly mentioned the challenges for customers being switched automatically over to prepayment meter. And we welcome the recent investigation by the Times, which shone a spotlight on the desperate situation that will be impacting many tenants at the moment around being switched automatically to a prepayment meter, either by a smart meter or through a forced installation under warrant. It's vital that social landlords are aware of the safeguards that there are within the energy industry to ensure that that doesn't happen to the most vulnerable people. You'll be aware of the vulnerability of many of your tenants, and you're on the front line in terms of policing those rules. So I hope you're already thinking or doing practical work in that space to ensure that tenants, vulnerable tenants, aren't being badly affected. And we're welcoming the conversation later on, talking about the compensation that they should receive. I want to spend last couple of moments talking about what's coming down the tracks, and the need for us all to remain vigilant and continue to work collaboratively to ensure that the most vulnerable people are as protected as they can be during this energy crisis. We are, as I've mentioned, hugely alarmed by the prospect that as of the 1st of April, the only targeted support that will be made available for the UK government are for those households that are on means-tested benefits or other very prescriptive targeted groups that will receive cost of living payments. We know that although welcome support for many households, will be defrayed across many essentials, including the cost of rent. So we're trying to campaign in the short term in this budget to make sure that those changes aren't as brutal as they are likely to be. But if we do move into a system that's more reliant on these cost of living payments as the main way of defraying some of the ongoing impact of the energy crisis, that we work collectively to work out who's not going to be targeted through those approaches. We're particularly concerned by those households with medical dependencies, health conditions which could be badly exacerbated by living in a cold home, and also those households that live on low incomes but don't claim any means-tested benefits. They are really in danger of falling through the cracks. There's about 2.5 million UK households that are in that position, and a lot of them will be in the social housing or the rented sectors. So I'd welcome an ongoing discussion about what we can do to support those households, and I'm welcoming the comments and observations from my fellow panelists and your questions at the end. Thanks very much, Martin.
Thank you very much. Absolutely great presentation, very thought-provoking, full of information, and we've got lots of questions coming in already, which is great. Just a reminder to everybody tuning in that this is your chance to ask questions that are going to help you with some of the issues that you're wrestling with and deal with issues back at your own organisation. So please do get those questions coming in, and again, I'll pick up on as many as possible once the presentations are done. So thank you, Peter, and Stephen, welcome, and the floor is yours. It's over to you.
Hi, Martin. Thank you. Really glad to be here today to kind of speak from a housing association perspective. And I'll try to be brief because I'm glad there's loads of questions, and it's probably more important that we have the conversation and answer the things that are on people's minds than I kind of tell you lots of stuff about what we're doing and what I'm thinking. So the first thing that kind of struck me was just reading the bit of a blurb about today's event. It highlighted the Joseph Rowntree report, the survey that said that 4.3 million households had reduced their spending on heating, and Peter's kind of given some updated figures, and the updates seem to be 1 million at a time, so they're quite significant. And I was just reflecting that my colleagues and probably yours, who aren't in the kind of 40% lower income bands, they're also reducing their heating. I don't think a day goes by when I don't have a conversation with someone about how they're trying to reduce their energy bills. And that isn't to say that we're kind of all in it together. It's more to emphasize that what might just be a financial issue or a challenge or a problem for middle and high earners is closer to being kind of a crisis or a catastrophe for people living on low incomes. And that's why I think it's so important that housing associations in general and large housing associations like Peabody more specifically need to be engaged in whatever way we can to mitigate the impact of these high fuel bills on our residents and our communities. Just want to say a little bit about the Peabody Index, which is a kind of Peabody plug. Um, we began publishing the index in 2018, and the index tracks the experiences of social housing tenants in order to make evidence-based recommendations to policymakers and others, but also to inform how we spend our kind of finite resources in a targeted way. Um, for researchers out there who are interested in the kind of mechanics of how we do it, you can find the details on our website. But in short, we work with some researchers to do an analysis of all the kind of publicly available information using widely known data sets alongside doing some surveys of working age social housing tenants in London, particularly our residents living in our property. Um, but more specifically for this topic on fuel poverty, we published some research last September entitled Protecting Social Housing Residents from Compounding Crises. The research was done earlier in the year before we even got up to winter and crisis and all that stuff. And we only surveyed 287 residents for this, whereas normally we're usually surveying about 1,000. But anyway, in terms of the findings, we found that prepayment meters, which are both expensive and inconvenient because of the higher standing charges, no choice in tariffs, difficulties in changing to direct debits. And I'm sure my colleagues like Linda will be able to give you more details on that. But despite that, 65% of our residents prefer it, largely because it helps them to control cost. We also found that even before winter, residents were cutting back in order to afford to pay their energy bills. 80% were heat restricting, 42% were spending less on food, 12% had borrowed from a short-term lender, and 41% were both restricting their heat use as well as spending less on food. So really is getting into what really was getting into crisis territory at that stage, and it's probably surpassed that by now. Off the back of that research, we wrote to Ofgem last year with 3 requests. One, that expensive standing charges for meters should be abolished. 2, that there should be a new reduced social tariff for those on low incomes. And 3, that smart prepayment meter rollout should be sped up to make it easier for people to switch to paying by direct debit if they choose to. More fundamentally, we believe that the prepayment meter should be the cheapest way to pay for fuel, and those on low income should be paying the least. You might ask, why don't housing associations just help residents with their fuel bills? Why don't we pull some of the levers that we can to lessen the impact? But many of you will know that we've got a number of challenges, both Peabody and the sector more widely. We've got competing objectives with limited resources. Inflation has pushed up our maintenance costs, it's pushed up our development costs, it's pushed up our interest costs, and it's pushing up salaries. At the same time, we've had our rents capped, which means that our income isn't rising in line with our expenditure. We've got continued spend on fire risk, on damp and mold, on carbon reduction challenges. And we've got increased demand for services from residents, repairs and otherwise, whether that's just pent up demand post-pandemic or whether that's just a new normal because expectations are higher. Alongside these challenges, we also need to be quite conscious of the kind of equality and diversity challenges, and to make sure that some residents aren't being even further penalized or suffering even greater challenges themselves. So we need to understand the data, and we need to analyze the data effectively, and we need to act on that data. So finally, I just want to talk a little bit about how we're supporting residents. So at one level, there's a range of various kind of practical initiatives, typically working in partnerships with others. So we're providing free energy advice alongside Agility Eco and Pocket Power. We're providing a number of what we're calling cozy corners in a number of our community centers across London and the home counties. We've increased our hardship funds. We've developed a new online directory of cost of living resources. We've got a range of community outreach programs so we can better understand who's having problems. My colleague who leads in our community investment has got an advice and well-being team who are focusing on tenancy sustainment. He's got an economic inclusion team that's targeting kind of how we can help residents improve household income. And we're trying to engage in a number of partnerships to essentially try to ensure a stronger safety net. But it's probably worth saying that I'm under no illusions. Peabody's under no illusions that no matter what we do, it's still tough out there for our residents and for our communities. But I think that means it behooves us even more to do all that we can to try to help those people, at this time that that's moving from crisis to catastrophe. And I'll leave it there, Martin.
Thank you very much. Yeah, lots to pick up on there. So thoughts about equality and diversity that we can pick up on, the hardship funds. Yeah, a whole lot to kind of wrestle with, and some of the policy suggestions as well. So thanks very much, Stephen. I should say loads of questions coming through in the Q&A box. Just a reminder to you, if you're sitting there, this is hopefully as useful as possible to you as it can be. So please ask the questions that you're wrestling with in your own organisations, and I will get to as many of them as possible following the presentations. So thank you very much. Right, thanks, Stephen. Sam, welcome, and over to you.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, so I'm Sam Collier. I work for HomeLink. I'm the kind of connected device IoT arm of ACO. What I'm going to focus on is the impact of fuel poverty on the health of homes, the consequent health impacts on health of residents, and also the role of technology in identifying and combating fuel poverty and those wider impacts. So this has been mentioned already about the kind of the scale of the issue at the moment, but we're looking at that kind of nexus between low income, inefficient homes and high energy costs as that's where fuel poverty is really found. Those circles there are all kind of narrowing in on each other. So homes aren't getting more inefficient, but they're being used in ways that are less efficient. Energy costs are increasing and incomes aren't rising at the rate that they should be. And as we've already heard, that's resulting in a vast increase in the number of people who are going to be described as fuel poor. So estimated around 7 million in October 2022, when the energy price guarantee was set at £2,500, and as we've heard, that's going to increase by around 1.5 million come April. So one of the major impacts of fuel poverty is that we see a huge increase in the number of cold homes, and this is particularly impactful on the health of our homes and on their residents. If we look at hazards across housing, cold homes are the #1 hazard in terms of their cost to the NHS, and I'll give you an idea of that in terms of the excess deaths on the next slide. It's estimated that £850 million could be saved by tackling excess cold in homes. So that is the cost to the NHS every year, and that's approximately 60% of the savings from dealing with all hazards within social housing. There's other things around kind of social benefits. So £15 billion estimated in savings around social benefit, things like increased social capital, productivity, the value of homes, and it's estimated that to basically mitigate cold in all homes, excess cold in all homes, it would cost £6 billion to mitigate that across the country. So in terms of the impacts on human health, of the 30,000 excess winter deaths estimated every year, and that fluctuates every year, but a quarter of those are likely due to having that excess cold within their homes. And one study found that those residents in the 25% coldest homes had a 1/5 greater risk of dying. So those living in the poorest performing homes are at massive risk of huge health impacts, exacerbating existing health conditions, and ultimately death. So it's the impacts of living in a property that is inadequately heated over the winter months is stark. And this is something we've seen. So this is a snapshot from one of our portals where we have temperature sensors within properties, and this is from January and February, so it's up-to-date data. And as you can see, consistently across all the rooms in this property, it's below that recommended minimum of 18 degrees. The bottom orange line is the outside temperature, so you can see they kind of quite easily match that across the room. So it's likely that the heating either isn't on at all or on a very low setting. And this is something that we've seen across a vast number of the properties that we have our sensors in. In terms of progress in improving the energy efficiency of our homes, we're basically going a little bit backwards. So the annual change in cavity wall insulation and solid wall insulation is decreasing. We're seeing less installations per year, and for us to meet the kind of goals that the Committee for Climate Change, based upon government targets, want to reach, we need to seriously stimulate action in the sector. And we need to do all that energy efficiency work before we can do things like introducing low carbon heat, which otherwise would probably increase the bills of residents. Energy costs, that has been mentioned again by one of the previous talkers, but basically what you can see is as we fall down through the EPC ratings, energy bills skyrocket. So as you can see, if you compare an average home where we would have £2,500 as their energy price guarantee, F and G rated EPCs would be more like £4,500, and this is based upon October's £2,500 guarantee. So as that increases, it's going to be significantly more impactful on those living in the poorest performing homes. Indicative monthly costs you can see on the side here. We're talking more than double if you're living in an F and G home over a C, but still significant if you're in an E and D. So if we look at how the sector is performing, actually the social housing sector is doing better than private and private rented and occupied. The mean SAP rating, so the EPC score, is up into that C band, but it's only just reached that point, so we've still got a lot of work to do. And one of the things we look at as well is a heat loss impact. So we measure heat loss based upon how quickly a property loses its heat. And this is an overview of all our properties and what their heat loss rating is looking like. So EPCC is between sort of 80 and 160 minutes to lose 1 degree. There's a lot of homes that are above that. There are a lot that are the other side, but we can see there's still quite a lot of work to do in this area. So one of the solutions that we are currently working on is looking at integrating to resident smart meters. We'll need resident consent, but it will enable us to look into, basically look at the gas and electricity consumption from each property, and we'll be able to see where residents are spending a lot of money on their heating. We can combine this with other data like their type of heating, the heat loss metric that I mentioned, and to see where we can actually intervene to reduce the amount of money that they're spending on their energy. This will also be surfaced to residents, so they will get their energy consumption like on an in-home display that you get with a smart meter. But we can use that to look at things like budgeting, allow residents to interact a little bit more with that data, so understand what they're looking to spend on a weekly, monthly basis, and show them basically how that works based upon their daily consumption. There'll be other things within this feature, things like tips about how they might be able to reduce their consumption in certain ways. And it will also relate to things like the rise of damp and mold and how they'd be able to kind of combat the two and make sure that their home is healthy to live in. The great thing about smart meters is they store 13 months of historical data on the smart meter itself. So we'll be able to go back in time and basically compare what was happening a year ago to now and see how that's changed, particularly based upon the increased energy prices and the price guarantees that have been brought in. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll be able to identify those who are in fuel poverty. So we'll actually provide an insight to landlords about how likely we think it is for residents that residents will be in fuel poverty. And in doing so, it will just give landlords a bit more information about where they can target certain things, support for residents, works that might improve their property so that they can take steps themselves to improve their conditions and their, the cost of their energy. So that's just a quick overview of what we're doing in relation to fuel poverty. If anyone has any questions, obviously put them in the Q&A, but I'm happy to take any directly if you're interested as well. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, and we are flying with questions. There's loads coming in, which I think goes to show how much people are wrestling with this issue right now. I mean, yeah, absolutely, loads coming in. And just a reminder, if you are tuning in, do use that question and answer box to ask the questions that are going to be most useful to you, to you and your jobs and in your own organisation. So lots coming through, but do keep them coming, and I'll get to as many as possible. Thank you very much, Sam. Linda, welcome. I know we had some problems connecting you earlier, but I think you've popped up since we started. So Linda, welcome, and over to you.
Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
you're ready to go, and we can see you as well. So welcome.
I'm glad I didn't swear because, yes, as you say, it's been a bit of a nightmare. I had a fire alarm at 11:24 when I was trying to get online, and then now I'm on my phone. So apologies for the portrait rather than landscape. And I will be gazing to the side because I can't actually read my own slides at this distance on my personal phone. So I'll crack on. Thank you. Right. So, yes. So, as you said in the introduction, my name's Linda Tukey. I work in a team of money advice and benefits advisors. We've got 17 full-time equivalents in the team, and as you can imagine, we're extremely busy. So today I wanted to talk to you about how bad it is out there. And I'm sorry to end on a negative note, but it is pretty bad out there. I'm sure most of you realise that, but I just wanted to get into the nitty-gritty about how bad it is, to see what and sort of prompt the discussion about what we can do to help, if anything. Just to explain what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about if I can get the thing to move, I'm going to talk about it's not all been a negative thing. From a personal perspective, the cost of living crisis has really made me think, and I'm sure it's made everybody think, about how much gas and electric we use within our own homes. And I suppose from one aspect that you might think that that's had a positive impact on utility use, that kind of stuff. And nationally, we're having a more considered approach to energy, and whether we're going to have wind farms, wave technology, all of those kinds of things. So that there are a few positives, I guess, that have come out of this, but the people we work with, it has been mainly negative. So as most of you will know, benefit levels lag way behind what the ongoing inflation. Employment is still seen as the way out of poverty, but the people that we're working with, the majority of them are on 0 hours contract. They don't know from one week to the other what they're going to be earning. That impacts on their universal credit, and it makes it really difficult for them to budget. So it's not necessarily a way out of poverty for a lot of people. Food inflation is running much higher than inflation for other things. So it's about 16.7%, the last figure. So we're seeing a basket of goods. We regularly look at how much a single person needs to live on, and the basket of goods has gone from about 151 to about 173 in the last 6 months. So that's £173 a month. That's a big jump in what somebody would need to spend on their food budget. Obviously, what we're here today to talk about, the energy price hikes, has impacted everybody. We're going into homes and seeing a lot of people not turning their heating on, but of course they're still being charged on the standing charge. And obviously their cold homes, as the previous speaker has said, is having an impact on things like damp and mould and what have you. So I thought it might be useful if we could look at what an actual budget looks like for somebody who's trying to live on universal credit. A single person on universal credit will be getting £334.91 a month to live on. So, for example, somebody who's earning somebody who's paying rent of £110 a week, living in a council tax, in a property that's council tax band A, will be having £874 as their income. But when you look at their outgoings, they far outweigh that. Particularly, their rent obviously is a big chunk of that. Council tax, I live in Portsmouth, and in Portsmouth, somebody who's on universal credit has to still pay a proportion of their council tax, so they've got to find money for that as well. The figures I've put here in red, if you want to have a look at them, the TV licence, getting the bus, that's, like once a week to the job centre or what have you. Gifts for family or friends at Christmas or Eid or what have you. I guess they can cut those all out, and in that way their budget will be more balanced. But at the moment, just paying £50 a month on gas and £60 a month on electric, and paying their water and their broadband mobile phone, really minimal, and their food, they are not going to have any money left at the end of the month. And in fact, they're probably going to be in deficit, most people. When you think about that as well, that's somebody who's over the age of 25. We accommodate people who are under the age of 25, and their income is going to be £265 a month, which is obviously a lot lower than 334. Yes, benefits are going to go up in April. They're going to go up by 10.1%, but they're still lagging behind. So what are the problems that we're seeing? We're seeing more customers living on and below the poverty line. I mean, if you're living on that sort of money, how could you not be? Not only are they, having to pay all of that out of their income, they're also quite often having deductions made from their benefits before they even get it in their pocket. That might be for historic tax credit overpayments or housing benefit overpayments, or an advance that they've taken out so that they can live on the first month when they get their universal credit. We're seeing now an increase in sanctions and claims being closed because somebody hasn't accepted their claimant commitment. They maybe have been sent a new claimant commitment and they don't realise that they've been sent that. They don't accept it and their claim's being closed. Obviously, other speakers I have spoken about prepayment meters and the issues there. We're seeing lots of people not getting the vouchers. We're having to chase that up for them. As a landlord, obviously, we're putting our rent up by 7%. But, if we don't do that, then obviously we're impacted by inflation as well. If we don't do that, then we'll have to see cuts to our services. So, yes, that's going to impact on customers as well. We're seeing an increase in consumer debt. We're seeing more problem gambling going forward as well. And obviously, all of these things are having an impact on our customers' mental and physical health, as is, the 12 years of austerity that we've seen. So the NHS, we're seeing more people having to wait longer for operations, for things that they need doing. They're not getting the mental health support that they need. They're not getting the adult social care that they need. All of these things are impacting on our customers, and it's really quite serious out there. So what are we doing as a housing association to try and make things better for our customers? Well, since COVID, we've tried to take a more supportive approach about rent arrears, where customers engage. Obviously, if customers don't engage, there's not much we can do about it. So, but if they engage with us, we try to be much more understanding about what their issues are and what a limited income they've got to live on, particularly with the increases in gas and electric. We've got a larger internal support team now. So as I said, I'm in a team of 17. So that seems like quite a big team we've got about 30,000 properties, but we're busy all the time. As a company, Vivid are investing in local pantries, so we're giving free membership to people for the first 4 weeks to try and encourage them to use pantries, because as you can see, if you're spending £173 a month on food, then it's much better if you're spending £20 a month or £25 a month on belonging to a pantry, and then subsidise, buying a bit extra to support what you haven't been able to get at the pantry. We're doing a lot of work with the Household Support Fund. And it's so bureaucratic, so people have to apply for that. They might not get it. Each local authority is working differently, and we work over about 15 different local authorities, so we have to be on top of what every local authority is doing. In the Portsmouth area, in the first 6 months of the Household Support Fund, Portsmouth got 1.9 million. But when you compare that to what they lost in losing the £20 a week uplift for people on universal credit, the economy in Portsmouth lost 19 million. So, that's a big drop in income for people. What else are we doing? We're making a lot of referrals we're doing discretionary housing payments with the local authorities. We're spending a lot of time on the phone to the utility companies. That's very time consuming. We're doing things like asking them to put debt to the back of the meter, so that people don't lose so much. I don't know if you've seen on the British Gas website, it says something like, if you top up with £10 and you owe us money, we'll keep £9 of it, you'll keep £1 towards your heating. It's, so we're doing a lot of work trying to negotiate with the utility companies about not trying to claw back so much debt. We're doing some referrals to LEAP, the Local Energy Action Partnership. In Portsmouth, we've got Switched On Portsmouth, the Environment Centre in Southampton, and we use quite often the Citizens Advice Extra Help Unit where we have disputes with the utility companies. We're also doing, am I running out of time here? I'll hurry up. We're doing pre-tenancy assessments and help customers to access furniture packages and white goods so that they don't spend their first lot of housing costs on fitting out their new property. We realise that a lot of people have got nothing when they move in, so we're doing a lot of work with those and making sure that they claim benefits at the right time to cover their rent and their household costs. We're using a lot of benevolent funds as well, so like the British Gas one, and our internal benevolent fund has also been increased. We've got a budget of about 350,000, and we're on target to spend that on things like white goods, gas and electric top-ups, carpets, all that kind of stuff. We've got a specialist damp and mould team, like everybody else now, trying to look at how we can best help customers in those circumstances. And of course, we've got a new approach to assets, like everybody else, looking at how we can, make sure that the properties are sound, that they've got enough insulation, all of those kinds of things. I've gabbled through that. I'm sorry, but I had a lot to tell you and only 8 minutes in which to do it. So I think I might have done it, or I might have overrun. So apologies if I've overrun. That was the end, by the way.
No, not at all. Thank you very much. Huge amounts to pick up on. Interest in lots of. I see some of the questions coming through. Interest in some of the specific things you've been trying, like pantries, for example. So lots of kind of specific questions. We've got about 16, 17 minutes to take questions. Do keep them coming through. There've been loads that have come through. So again, just showing. Linda, you said you're talking about how bad things are. I think certainly the questions that are coming through demonstrate that there's a lot of people kind of wrestling with this issue right now and wanting some answers. I think we've got a few themes coming through and a few specific questions about some of the things you're trying out as well, Linda. So I'll come back to them shortly. But a couple of themes emerging. We'll move initially to prepayment meters because there are quite a few questions along those lines, and then we'll move on to questions about data. There's definitely some questions coming through about data collection, and again, our survey right at the start, Linda, I think you might have missed that when you were signing on, suggested that some landlords are bang on top of kind of collecting the data, but about who's in fuel poverty, but there's some gaps elsewhere, and some people either about to start or haven't started yet. So a real range of performance. But let's move to prepayment meters first. I mean, obviously, it's been getting a lot of the kind of national headlines due to the investigations that were referenced in some of the presentations. And Peter, I'll probably bring you back in first. You've had your voice has had a chance to rest, so we'll bring you back in. A lot of questions about meters, and we'll talk about perhaps how you think people should be compensated. I mean, again, worth referencing that Ofgem have been very active in this area, and this week, I think the CEO of Ofgem said he was very concerned about the way that customers already in distressing situations are being treated when suppliers force them onto prepayment meters. I guess the first question to you is, how do you think people should be compensated? But also, I guess in terms of perhaps crackdowns on that, what are the kind of pros and cons of the kind of current dialogue, really? So, Peter, over to you.
Thank you very much. I think it's really a vital question, particularly in social housing, where we do see a lot more than average of households that are on prepay, either those legacy prepayment meters, where due to the actions of a previous tenant, for example, the prepayment meter is still in there, irrespective of the credit history or indebtedness of the current occupants. So I think there's two things. First of all, how do we make things right for those customers that have been affected by this recent scandal and have been switched over wrongly to prepayment, either by warrant or switched over automatically via a smart meter? There is a real financial detriment associated with being on prepayment meters compared to being on direct debit, about £55 per year. As I've mentioned briefly and other speakers have commented on, there's also this vicious practice of how standing charges accrue on those meters, irrespective of whether or not a household is using very little or no energy in their property. So we'd be looking at the regulators to ensure that those standing charges are written off. As Linda rightly says, looking at varying the amount of debt recovered on those meters and potentially writing some of that debt off. These are all practical things that will help ensure that those households that have been wrongly impacted are able to get back to a situation that they were previously in. I think the slightly wider question is, how do we not throw the baby out with the bathwater, particularly around the opportunities on trying to ensure that households that are on those traditional prepayment meters, who, as I mentioned, have struggled most to receive government support, do still benefit from the smart meter rollout, which is obviously a program that they're paying for out of their energy bills. I think it's really vital that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, as well as accessing government support much more quickly and easily. A range of agencies can help put credit onto those meters, emergency credit or top-up vouchers onto those meters automatically. And that's a massive virtue in an energy crisis. It's much cheaper. Being on a prepayment meter is still much cheaper than being on standard credit. So if customers are on standard credit and pay by cheque or by cash, they're typically paying a much dearer premium in the energy market, £250 per year compared to £50 a year. So we want to be able to make sure that those customers can move across if they can reasonably benefit from being on a prepayment meter and aren't vulnerable or going to be made more vulnerable. And then switching those households, a smart meter provides the opportunity to switch those households from being on prepayment to standard credit. And it's this sort of flip side of the current issue that we would like to see suppliers being much more willing to do, which is to switch households that come out of hospital, for example, or perhaps are in temporary vulnerable situations, to benefit from being on standard credit or a credit customer, as opposed to being on prepay. And then final thing, I guess, where the rubber hits the road from a social landlord's perspective, being on a smart meter or moving towards smart and helping coordinate that rollout really obviates these removal costs, these large removal costs that otherwise the tenant would be faced with, or the landlord. And we think it's absolutely vital that we get, after this crisis abates, or during when this crisis abates, that we get on top of that opportunity on behalf of tenants.
Thanks very much. And I think that answers a few of the questions that people were coming in with prepayment meters. There's a question from Kevin, and I'll throw it out there first. Stephen, I'll come to you next if that's all right. Which, just on that issue, are landlords engaged? I mean, the question is are landlords engaged in the removal of prepayment meters in any way? But I guess that kind of dialogue, how are you engaging with tenants on this issue? And Stephen, over to you, and Linda, I'll probably come to you after that.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it falls into that category of landlords don't necessarily know best. We might have some insight, and we already heard all the data about, we know how more expensive it is. But there's the counter to that residents might say, yeah, it's more expensive, but I know what my outgoings are, and so I don't get landed with some bills that I can't afford. So I think the short answer is yes, we're supportive of residents and what they want. And we'll let them know what the options are. And if they want prepayment meters removed, we'll try to support and assist that. If they want to manage their bills, we will carry on with the more kind of macro issues of campaigning to make it fairer for them. And we'll carry on with our retrofit programs as well to make their homes more energy efficient. And there are no kind of short-term solutions. I think you have to do some of the micro reactive stuff to helping individuals with the challenges that they have, some of the kind of middle ground stuff around partnerships of organizations that can provide a range of support, and then some of those kind of big policy levers that can help kind of hold communities really, and just being conscious and working across all three of those.
Thanks very much. And Linda, similar question to you. So our landlords engaged in the removal of prepayment meters in any way, and then we'll move on to some of the specifics. So I think there are some questions about data, for example. So we'll want to look at how data is being collected. So we'll move on to that in a second. But just to throw that question at you as well.
Certainly, where prepayment meters have been enforced on somebody, we would be taking that up. And obviously, after the announcement by Ofgem, I think it was Tuesday morning, we will be trying to get them removed and compensation. But I would agree with the previous speaker. A lot of people like prepayment meters. They know what they've got to pay, and it helps them budget on when they're on a limited income. It's just the fact that it's £5.18p a week is the standing charge, and it's too much for most people. So, yeah, that we'll be doing something on it, I'm sure. Yeah.
Thanks very much. And I think let's move to the question about data next. Several questions along these lines, and I think it's interesting. To reflect on just the poll, obviously not scientific, but the poll we did earlier, just to see where everybody in the room is today. So clearly, how you might go about collecting information is still something that landlords are wrestling with. Sam, there's a question from Celia. Thanks, Celia. Sam, about linking with smart meters. Is there any way to get this information for people not on smart meters? And we'll come to various questions about data shortly, but let's start with that one.
Yeah, no problem. So, I mean, in short, there are other ways to get that data, but it won't be at the granularity or the regularity that smart meters provide it. So there's two kind of approaches. One is through meter readings, which either the resident can give you, or there are centralized databases where you can get that. They're quite expensive to be part of. The other side of things is a hardware-based approach where you can install things like current clamps on kind of analog meters, and that will give you the energy consumption. We've used those in the past, and they're really quite unreliable. They're quite easy to tamper with. The data they provide isn't as good as smart meter data, so that's why we've kind of gone down the smart approach. The government has a target to roll out smart meters to every home, by 2025. Unlikely to happen by that point, but we've already at the kind of 50% mark now. So yeah, we feel like it's a more robust approach going down the smart meter route and making use of that kind of public investment. So that's kind of why we're choosing that avenue.
Thanks very much. And sorry, I was just struggling to unmute for a second there. Yeah, question about people who arrange their own utilities. Is anyone aware of a solution to get consumption data for tenants who arrange their own utilities, so only they have access to smart meter data, usage data? Brackets. All of my portfolio is like this, so you can see the frustration there. So yeah, back to you, Sam. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we would be able to access that data through the central smart meter network. The resident has to give consent because it is considered personal data. Energy consumption data within the home tied to their address and their personal details is considered personal data. So they need to consent to give that data to their landlord or other party. But that would be the way to do it, unless they were willing to kind of give you meter readings. Yeah.
Thanks very much. And actually, I'll just touch on briefly a question that Stephen raised. And Stephen, I'll come to you next. I mean, talking about collecting data, understanding where tenants are, understanding who's in fuel poverty, what that means for people. You raised the issue about, I think, equality and diversity challenges that might be. We need to understand the data, you said, I think, during the presentation. Sam, I'll come back to you in a second, but Stephen, just interested in your thoughts on that. How are you going about collecting that data? Is that easy to access? Is that something you've got some insight into at this stage, or is it something you're working on?
Good question. I was reflecting when you were talking about data. It's kind of the classic, water everywhere, not a drop to drink, to misquote Samuel Coleridge. We collect data in lots of ways for lots of things. sometimes when you put it all together, it doesn't necessarily tell you a story. And we've also got to be sensitive that our residents aren't human guinea pigs to give us loads of information so that we can kind of come to lots of views on things. And Sam just mentioned the kind of consent needed for personal data. But to answer the question more directly, what I think we need to do is what we are attempting to do is when we, for instance, get damp and mold data from households, and those numbers are high, you've got thousands of residents highlighting damp and mold issues, we should be using that data sensitively to understand if certain individuals or groups of residents have damp problems and why they might have those problems, and what we might do so that we don't just kind of treat the individual symptoms in individual homes and flats, but that we understand and learn of what that might mean more collectively or even systemically. And if that can be overlaid with groups based on their ethnicity or their age or their gender or whatever it happens to be, then we need to understand that as well and think about what our response needs to be in those circumstances. I think it's early days now, though, so I couldn't definitively say we've learned this and we are therefore doing that.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Really, and Sam, I'll just come to you very quickly on this. I know we're short on time, but just in terms of that equality and diversity and the information that's being learned, is that something that's part of your thinking, and how does that feed through for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So accessibility is a big thing for us. So looking at how we can provide tools to to everyone, we need to look at digital exclusion and ensuring that we're providing means of providing information to all residents. So it might be that we can provide like printed hard copies of information that gives them recommendations about what to do based upon what we've learned about their house. And also we look at so some of the work we've done and also sort of applications for funding. We've worked with landlords who work to identify those areas of deprivation. So we've used things like the index of multiple deprivation to understand where we can target approaches to kind of reach those people who need the assistance first, and we can do that. So within kind of, if we look at the retrofit space, there's an idea of tackling the worst first, but incorporating that's worst first in terms of the structure of the building, but we're looking at also incorporating social factors into that to understand who is being most negatively impacted by those poor performing homes, so that they can get the support first. So they're the kind of things we're looking at.
Thank you very much. And Linda, we're almost out of time, so I'm going to give you some quick fire questions, if that's all right. But some quite specific ones based on your presentation, so we'll get through a few of those. So question one, how have you trained admin staff members to act as energy welfare advisors? I think was directed at you.
Gosh, that's an interesting question. Well, we used to have a green team here at Vivid, but we no longer have one of those. So what we try and do is to give people as much information as possible about all of the different options there are for people who are struggling. We have a team that triage the referrals that come through to us, and they pick up the emergency things, and my team do all of the referrals out to LEAP or whoever like that. So it's not, I wouldn't say that we're training everybody out there, but we do have a new sustainability lead here who is definitely looking at everybody being an expert in energy advice, because we all need to do it.
Thanks very much. And in a quick fire, one or two, question from Marie Claire. Interested to know how Vivid's money advice and benefits team is funded. I think is this through core funding or charitably funded? So where does
No, it's entirely core funded.
Brilliant. And we've also got one last question. Again, we'll get through some of the specifics, because again, these are really practical examples people can take away. Linda, I'd love to know more about the furniture packages and white goods support you offer your customers as additional support. So just a few words on that, and we'll pass on. Susan, I think you've provided your email details. We'll pass that on afterwards to Linda, so you can have a further conversation. But
certainly. We set up a charitable arm of Vivid last year. It's called Vivid Plus, and they fund different organisations, Scratch, Move On Portsmouth, I think we're thinking about funding, and we give them an amount of money every year or every quarter, and they put together furniture packages for us for people when they move in at minimal cost. So that works really well. We work with particular carpet shops so that they give us quite good deals on carpeting in people's homes. That kind of thing. But happy to talk to anybody about how we work. Yeah, definitely. We work with a very large company who provides electrical goods as well, and we get quite a good deal for them, so we can provide white goods for people.
Thanks very much. Yeah, we'll pass on the email details. I know they were provided in the question and answer box. I won't read them out now, but we'll pass them on afterwards so you can follow up that conversation. Thank you very much. Peter, I'll bring you in for a last very quick point, if that's all right. And there is a question from Claire. Do you think social landlords should be obliged to offer furnished tenancies or appliances? But I guess, yeah, what obligations do you think there should be on social landlords in this area, perhaps? But a very quick answer, if that's okay, because we're just over time.
Yeah, just really briefly, a plea. We have got statutory fuel poverty commitments, which should require that all fuel poor households are brought up to a reasonable standard of energy efficiency by the end of this decade. I think the polling that you undertook at the beginning of this indicated that a large percentage of landlords aren't monitoring who's in fuel poverty. Please don't make a rob your own back in terms of that needing to be a complicated calculation. Is the household living on a very low income? Are they living in a house below band C? If the answer is yes, then we know we've got to do something by the end of the decade to get them there. So just a plea really to get involved on that endeavour, as I know many of the people are.
Fabulous, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm afraid we are out of time. There were loads of questions that came through. Hopefully, we got through a decent cross section of them. Jason, I've just seen yours. We'll pass on your email details as well. Yeah, there's a few people after follow-up questions, so we'll pass on the details of people who got in touch about that. Yeah, thank you all so much for tuning in today. Thank you to our fabulous panel for a really interesting discussion series of presentations. And yeah, we could have carried on for a lot longer, I think. Thank you to ACO for sponsoring and making today possible. So yeah, all that remains for me to say is, yeah, thank you all for tuning in and see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.